which is going to affect us all who live in, well, it's no third lane. It's sidewalks and curbs now, so that means when they rip up the sidewalks and curbs, which they will have to do, to put a third lane in there eventually when it finally gets back downtown to downtown Dartmouth, which is heading in that direction now with the traffic backup, where people trying to get through the intersection will have to rip all that up again, put pavement down, probably put the sidewalks back down, which you very seldom see pedestrians in that area. There's really no reason for them to travel there, although sidewalks are a great thing and a great safety thing for people in the community and very important. But they could have easily just moved the curb back a little bit further, put the sidewalks in and the third lane, and had it so it could handle a lot more traffic. So I'm not convinced that the engineers always do the things they should do to make traffic move easily. And also, when traffic moves easier, there's less frustration, there's probably less accidents, and you can extrapolate that to all kinds of different scenarios. So when you look at this roundabout, I'd say it's just a modification of a rotary that doesn't work. We know they don't work. They're expensive to build, not as expensive as an interchange, but they're more expensive if you build them first and then have to put an interchange like they did at the Micmac Rotary. And nobody ever forget that rotary, even at early in the morning when traffic was going through that before rush hour was jammed up. I mean, it was a horrible thing. And now they're talking about putting more of these things in, and it just doesn't seem to make sense. And it really disturbs me that the department hasn't even done their homework that they said they're going to do now at the airbase. They're going to paint this thing all out, which won't tell you anything because it doesn't really give you the full flow of traffic going through there, because if people are driving on it that understand how it works, it'll work. Of course it will. It's like anything. You train somebody, it'll work. But if you get people moving into this that don't maybe understand how it is and get stopped in the middle, all the traffic will stop again, and you're finished. You're taking actually 4 lanes of traffic, turn it to 1 lane. Anytime you take 4 lanes of traffic and put it to 1 lane, they just all won't mesh. It's just that simple. So you're slowing things down. It'd be the same as taking a 4-lane highway down to 1 lane and see how fast the traffic backs up, and that's a straight go with no turns and no pedestrians in the middle of it. You add pedestrians into this and put it down to 1 lane, which is basically what's going to happen here, it's going to slow traffic right down to almost a stop. And again, you know, it looks like by this fancy brochure again, and that you know, there's been a reduction in some accidents and injuries, which is really good. I'm pleased to see that, but it doesn't talk about how it affects traffic flows and what kind of conditions that you would typically use this type of an interchange. Maybe in some areas of really low traffic and no potential high traffic, it may work well. It may work well indeed, but there's no information been presented to us today to indicate that's the case. And I'd like to get some more information on this, some more detailed information, more studies on it to see exactly under what conditions that can be used, and probably set some conditions. Because again, we're looking at taxpayers' dollars here. We're also looking at an economy. You slow the traffic down, you slow the ability for businesses to get their merchandise back and forth, people to get to work, and do all the other things that make the economy roll, this could have a negative effect if it doesn't work properly. Also could have a major impact on the taxpayers of this province. If you build this thing for dear knows what cost, and depending of course on the location, and then 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road you put an interchange in as they did in Dartmouth at the Parklow, and then you're talking multi-million-dollar change to tear up what you've got, redirect the traffic, and do everything all over again. It's doing it twice. I think we've got to start looking in this province at the reality that we're approaching 1 million people, and we've got to start building roads to handle the vehicles that are traveling. And if we don't do that properly, we're going to be held back, and the economy is going to be held back. It's that simple. And if you can't tie transportation, take the economy out of transportation out of the economy. If transportation works well and the economy goes well, if the transportation system isn't in place to support the economy, it won't happen. It's just that simple. It's the same as taking all the telephones out of Nova Scotia. If you take them all out, the economy would drop immediately. It's that simple. It's all a matter of the elements you have to make the economy. So I'm very concerned about this. I'd like to see some more information on it. I'm not sure from my limited experience of seeing what happened in Dartmouth and in the Armdale Rotary. That's an abortion beyond belief that doesn't allow traffic to get in there. It'd be better to do a proper study on that, instead of rebuild the Armdale Rotary to something like this, it probably won't work. Maybe it will, who knows. Then to put a proper in-exchanger again and do a proper traffic study to see what can be done to alleviate the traffic. And that could be all kinds of things. It could be better bus service, it could be an interchange, it could be upstream from the Armdale Rotary, improvements in the traffic so it flows easier. It could be all kinds of things. But if you just dump this thing in place, spend a whole bunch of money on it again and find out it doesn't work, you're right back to where you started, except you're out a lot of money, and it really hasn't helped. So I'm not convinced these things are going to improve anything. And they say they work well in London. Well, I've been in London at one of these things, and I was there working, and I remember one day I seen one car sitting in a roundabout there for 2 hours. One spot, never moved for 2 whole hours. So it really works well in London in that particular location. And it just makes you wonder what the situation was. And I was doing business at the time when I was there, and I left for a meeting, and I come back, and lo and behold, the same vehicles are still in the same spot. So it makes you wonder where this information was done. And I'd like to know what wonderful engineer decided that the Armdale Rotary and the Micmac Rotary were such a wonderful thing. I wonder if it's the ancestors of these people suggesting the same darn thing again. You know, you never know. Or the same professor at the university saying this is a great idea, let's go forward with it. And I prefer this thing to wait until the departments have got a time to paint their lines on the asphalt and see if it really does work, which is really not a good study anyway, but it's, I guess it's a study. So it would be a lot better to find out exactly what's going on with these, and I'd like to see some more information. I would ask that the minister, and I know he will because he's very cooperative, to provide us with a lot more detail in this glossy, expensive brochure that really doesn't do anything for me or the people of Nova Scotia. Thank you.
The All-Member Cole Harbour Eastern Passage. The All-Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
I don't know. Yeah, there it is. Hello. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to speak for a minute. I guess I might want to say that from some of the comments from the Liberal caucus, I assume they might be voting against this piece of legislation. But I guess I want to speak particularly on one particular issue, which is the issue of the need for the rapid transit from the suburban areas. And I know that there are particularly a couple of projects being developed, as my colleague from Sackville-Cobequid noted, from Sackville and from Cole Harbour, that will allow for the buses to become rapid buses or express buses that will have access. And this legislation will allow them to be able to proceed prior to the cars at certain traffic lights, presumably on Portland Street, I guess. I think that's a good thing. I'm glad to see the government is doing its part in making sure that this comes to fruition. Anything we can do to encourage mass transit, to ensure that people are able to access their work, whether it be in Burnside or in downtown Halifax or wherever it may be in Metro from areas like Cole Harbour, I think is important. I think there's a lot of traffic congestion, particularly in the Portland Valley, that needs to be addressed. I hope that this legislation is one small component of that. I'll leave much more detailed comments, Mr. Speaker, for Bill 64 when we call it for debate again. Thank you.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Halifax Citadel.
Oh, sorry, Jerry. No, sorry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My comments will be brief in this, in relation to this bill. Obviously, some of the matters that have been outlined in this bill are positive changes. I think that the one that has been highlighted from the member from Cole Harbour Eastern Passage are obviously positive changes. Rapid transit to the center of the city is something that's a real priority. I also note that the comments in here are the changes with respect to the possibility of revoking licenses for people who have received absolute and conditional discharges are a step in the right direction. There are other things that obviously deserve our favorable consideration. I am, however, not clear yet on why it is that we need to deal with rotaries in relation to this piece of legislation, and perhaps over time it will become clearer to all the parties involved. We've had from my memory, 4 notable experiences with rotaries in this province. The one with respect to the Micmac rotary was largely a disaster. The Parklow that replaced it has obviously demonstrated that this was an engineering mistake to have gone with a rotary at that time. The ones, however, in Pictou County and at the Strait, and this is entirely anecdotal, don't appear to have created much concern or problem. They seem to operate reasonably effectively. The traffic movement through those rotaries are, generally speaking, lighter, and it's nice to get off the causeway and to be able to go directly to where you're wanting to go when you hit Cape Breton Island, and not to be stopped by a red light, heaven forbid. The matter of concern to my constituents will relate to potential changes to the Armdale Rotary. I lived on the other side of the Armdale Rotary at one time, went through it, and I may be the only person in the legislature who had the unfortunate incident of actually having an accident in the Armdale Rotary, Mr. Speaker, entirely of my own making, a single car accident, and I'll say no more. No, I didn't end up in court for that one. I did limp to my hockey game, however, that was to be held. That may be a clue as to how the accident happened in the first place. In any event, Mr. Speaker, the Armdale Rotary matter will be something of great concern to the residents of HRM, particularly on the west side of HRM. This is a central place for traffic to flow in and out of the peninsula. There's been much discussion about creative options, and I want to be certain that we have exhausted all of those other creative options before we move to this particular approach, because the others may be more expensive, but from an economic perspective and from a safety perspective, there may still be other solutions to the Armdale Rotary challenges that ultimately give us a better result than this one. The glossy brochure that we received today outlines some indication of how accidents are reduced and when one moves to a roundabout as opposed to a rotary. I think that we need to have more detail with respect to the research that supports those assertions, and if the minister is able to provide the research that supports those assertions, or members from his officials in his department could do that, I think it would be a welcome development. The other relates to the efficiency of a roundabout as opposed to a rotary, and nothing in this glossy brochure seems to give us a clear indication of whether or not this is going to increase or reduce the bottleneck that exists at the Armdale Rotary. And I think before the people in my constituency, and I think for the people on this side of HRM are going to be warm to the idea of a roundabout, I think they'd want to have some reassurance that this is not going to create increased bottlenecks, and that ultimately not only will safety be improved, but the efficiency on the road will be improved. Those are my remarks. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I had intended to speak at length on this Bill 92, particularly with respect to transportation, because I believe that this is a very important issue, and I would have hoped that we would have had a capital transportation authority into place many years ago, and we in the legislature would not have been talking about such a proposal as this. The bottom line is Mr. Speaker, is that I certainly hope that we don't look at this as a piecemeal part of studying transportation. I do know that traffic management groups throughout the municipality, and each city at one time or another and town had its own traffic management group, each conflicting with each other on how they were going to deal with the traffic issues in their municipalities. And I certainly know that serving on the Transportation Committee of the City of Dartmouth, and I do know that Halifax had one, I know the town of Bedford had one, and so on, and it was a mishmash of transportation matters that would come forward. Each, I don't think, had the dialogue that was needed to address the overall picture of metropolitan transportation. And I have to tell you, Mr. Speaker, that with a growing population of some 300,000 to 400,000 people in this municipality, and knowing that many of the developments for communities are going outside the city into suburbs, yet people are employed and working in the city. And when I look out the Legislative Assembly and downtown down Halifax here and I see Hollis Street with tractor trailers and so on and so forth moving back and forth through the major part of downtown, I know that we have not done a good job. I know that we have not done a good job at looking at transportation. And I do know that if we decide tomorrow to build a roundabout at the Armdale Rotary and not address the issues with respect to my colleague from Halifax Atlantic who said about the streets of Shabakto, the streets of Quinpool Road, the Purcell's Cove Road, the Highfield, the Spryfield Road, where the backup of these bottleneck traffics take place after you go on the Rotary, then in fact you're right back from square one. You have not addressed the issue. Each time that I went through the Armdale Rotary, Mr. Speaker, if it was to go to Spryfield, if it was to go to Howe Avenue, or wherever, when I hit that Rotary, I'm no longer in that Rotary proper for no more than 3 minutes. It's the length of time that it takes you to get there and the length of time that it takes you to come out of there that is the major problem. Now, I had intended to speak at length on this, but I do know that this is going to law amendments, Mr. Speaker, and I do know that a number of sage remarks will be made at law amendments with respect to how to address this particular issue. But I certainly hope that with our growing population, that we don't continue to gear our streets and roads network solely to the automobile that carries one person, but to public transit and alternate modes of transportation. Because another 10, 15 years, the kind of transportation that we see ourselves driving today will change significantly. And Mr. Speaker, that's where the crutch of the issue needs to be directed to. And traffic management groups and authorities across the province, not only in metro area, have to look at those modes of transportation that are going to happen 10 or 15 years down the road. I profess to know nothing about roundabouts. I have not been in England, Sweden, or anywhere else, or in the United States where they have them. I do see the brochure. I have some semblance of how it might work, but I really don't have the factual evidence of how it will work. And maybe if I go to Greenwood and I do the testing as a citizen on the design or the layout of the roundabout, then I'll have a better understanding and better knowledge of it, Mr. Speaker. But until then, I can only wait till this goes to law amendments and listen to the citizens who, in fact, will be directly affected. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader. Be closed debate on Bill number 92. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Before moving third reading on this bill, second reading. I keep trying to push these bills through a little faster perhaps than I should, Mr. Speaker. Second reading of Bill 92, or 90, whichever the case may
92.
be. Mr. Speaker, I think it's only fair that I should comment for a moment on the business about roundabouts, circles, rotaries, and what have you. Mr. Speaker, I remember well the Micmac Rotary. Some of the people speaking in the House, I don't think, do really remember it because they were probably not born at the time when the Micmac Rotary was the blight on the landscape. But Mr. Speaker, it certainly was a mess. And it wasn't even a rotary in point of fact. It was just a meeting of a number of streets that all happened to converge on the same spot on Earth, and then everybody had to sort out to how they were going to get out of the center of that particular convergence of roads. In fact, when the examination was made of the Micmac Rotary, if I remember correctly, Mr. Speaker, they looked at one time about putting in a series of bridges across the lake, and that fortunately was discarded for the arrangement that we have now, which is not a rotary, not a circle, and is certainly not a roundabout. That solution, though, Mr. Speaker, was very, very expensive. I think it cost somewhere in the neighborhood of about $41 million back in 1980 something, whenever it was that we did that particular construction. So it was a very, very expensive solution, Mr. Speaker, for what was really, though, a very complex problem. Let me just tell you about a roundabout. I know the honourable member for Preston said that he was stuck on one, or somebody else was stuck on one, like the gentleman who was stuck on the Boston subway, and that is a tune back from the 70s, I guess. But anyway, it's impossible for traffic to stop on a roundabout because the core of the roundabout keeps moving continuously. Any stopping that would occur is for traffic coming onto the circle. But in fact, Mr. Speaker, there is very, very little even pausing of traffic coming into a roundabout. I've had the good fortune or bad fortune to have driven on some English roads and some German roads and some French roads, and I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that the traffic does move smoothly and does move swiftly, and indeed it is an accepted transportation methodology to move traffic through an intersection with a minimum amount of stopping, with a minimum amount of collisions. So, Mr. Speaker, this is not an experiment. This is something that is, in fact, at the present time, perfectly acceptable in most places in the world. The reason that we're putting in what's been described as a training ground down at Greenwood is simply to check the layout of every roundabout that we build to make sure that the geometric design is going to work. So, Mr. Speaker, that's simply that's what that's all about. And I should also mention that the Rotary is the responsibility of HRM, not the province. And if a Rotary is a roundabout is built there, it'll be built by HRM, not by the province. So, Mr. Speaker, I think this legislation cures a number of impediments that we have in the Motor Vehicle Act at the present time. And as I say, the portion on roundabouts is simply there because there is a change in the rules of driving when you enter a traffic circle or a roundabout. And Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I'd move second reading of Bill number, and I better get it right, 92.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 92. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried.
Act to amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
This bill will be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move now that the House to rise and to meet again on Monday at the hour of 4 p.m. and the House will sit from 4 p.m. until 10 p.m. The order of business on Monday will be public bills for second reading. We'll be dealing with the Electricity Act, Mr. Speaker, and the bills introduced today by the Minister for Social Services, for Service Nova Scotia, and for any other bills that are available for second reading. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Motion is the House adjourned until 4 p.m. on Monday. Is it agreed? All those in favor say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The House is adjourned until 4 p.m. on Monday.